Buongiorno, Mondo, and welcome back to 15 with Fosca, the podcast. It's a very special day, not only because my guest is the highly prolific and absolutely wonderful author and podcaster, Jo Piazza, but also because her brilliant novel, The Sicilian Inheritance, comes out in paperback today. And trust me, after our conversation, you, like many of her readers, me included, are going to want to book a flight to Sicily as soon as possible. In this episode, Jo and I explore the book's rich historical layers, its personal and cultural significance for us both, and why Sicily is the perfect setting for a story of mystery, family, and reinvention. Trust me, we're going to get you dreaming about Sicily. So thank goodness our sponsor, Exclusive Connection, can make your dreams come true. Based in Florence, they specialize in luxury, tailor-made travel experiences across Italy. From historic walking tours to exclusive culinary adventures, they'll craft the perfect journey just for you. Visit exclusiveconnection.it and make your trip extraordinary. And now to my chat with Jo Piazza about her gripping novel, which is one that illuminates the magic and complexity of Sicily in ways you won't forget. Let's get into it. Good morning, Jo.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm really happy to have you here on the podcast. I am delighted to be speaking about your wonderful novel, The Sicilian Inheritance.
I'm very excited. The paperback is coming out right now, and it's been a year. It's been a year since this book came out. I did 2 book events for it this week. It's been going and going and going, but most importantly to me, it's been inspiring people to travel to Sicily and also to learn about their Italian roots.
And I love that. And I think I told you in our first conversation after I had read the book that for me, it was, it was so many things, but I think the thing that touched me most was that it really did bring me to Sicily, a place that I love and that I know well. And it did so in a very real and very delicious way. But you also really, did your homework and you did your research and you took on some really large topics, but you did it in such a way that it just made everything more magical. And
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for saying that. It brings me so much joy.
but it's true. And, when you read, I've read reviews and I've read what readers say. And one of the first things that people say is, okay, I'm ready to pack my bags. Or hold on, I had to stop reading to Google flights to Sicily. I mean, Jo, what you're doing for Sicily, I think I told you the first time we spoke, was like, they should really be paying you because you're painting this beautiful, enticing picture of Sicily, which I think in the collective imaginary, especially for us Italian Americans, but I think really in general, Sicily is so, in the collective imaginary, it's so filmable, it's so writable, right? Everything from
Yes.
from the great Italian writers like Verga and Maria Messina, and even now the Netflix adaptation of The Leopard. It just shows that Sicily has this eternal appeal. And so with your book, I think you've inspired people once again, sort of the way The Godfather did, the way The White Lotus did, to pack their bags and come.
To pack their packs and come. Exactly. And that was always one of my goals, to capture the magic and the mystery and just the sense of place of Sicily. It is somewhere unlike anywhere else in the world. And I wanted Sicily to be a character in this book, to have real main character energy, and for the book to inspire people to go. My favorite story about that is that I was at a book event a few months ago, and a woman came up to me. She was in her 80s, and she told me that she's never left the country. She had Sicilian roots, but she was born here. She's never left the country. She didn't have a passport. Her husband didn't want her to travel, and so she didn't. But she was like, but I read this book, and I'm going to go. I'm going to go back to the town where my grandmother was from. I got my first passport. Her granddaughter is taking her. And she's like, and my husband can't do anything about it because he's dead. And I'm like, wow, okay, great. And so it was amazing, that this book could inspire that and, really shift someone's thinking and their life trajectory and let them do this thing that they always dreamed about doing, but they maybe just needed permission to do it.
And that must feel incredible. I mean, you've said many times that this is your favorite book that you've written, and you've written many. And
And it is. I mean, I know we're not supposed to say that. I know we're also, not supposed to say we have a favorite child, but I have a favorite
right.
child. We all do.
But that comes through everywhere in this book, Jo. And, Italian American woman to Italian American woman, it just spoke to me on so many levels, the contemporary women that we are, mothers, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And, the dual narrative, I'll just no spoilers, but there is this very exciting family web, and extremely strong female characters to whom you give a voice. And that's why it's just, for me, it's fascinating, because as an historical novel, you've done a great job of depicting that reality of the white widows. And so it's so compelling to me that this 80-something-year-old woman who now no longer has the burden of the husband, who can finally go, she feels that ancestral call, and you've inspired that in people. And that must feel really good.
It does. I mean, it feels really awesome. I love it. And I helped plan their trip too. I was like, oh my God, let me tell you where to go and what to do. And you have to talk to my friend Chiro, who's a guide. And that's the thing, because the book has inspired so many people to go to Sicily. When we were coming up with the paperback, my editor asked me, she's like, do you want to do reader's guide questions in the back? And I'm like, no, not really. Like, I would like to have a Sicilian itinerary, so that we can, tell people where to go to enjoy the things that are in the book. I think that's so much more fun. It's so much more interactive. And I love what you said about the strong women, because Sicilian women are just some of the strongest women that I've ever met. And yet I think that their stories have often been in the shadows of Sicilian men. And so my goal here was to show that strength and to show their stories and to really illuminate that. And I thought a lot, especially I started writing this book after I had my second baby, my first daughter. And I thought a lot about the stories that we tell about women, the stories that we keep about women, and the things that are passed down. And Sicilian Inheritance is inspired by my own family history. It's completely a work of fiction, but my great-great-grandmother, Lorenza, was murdered in Sicily before she could join her husband and her sons here in America. And my family passed that story down for a long time, but they passed it down through the lens of the men. That the men came here to, build a better life. And, the family matriarch may have been murdered. We don't know what happened to her. A lot of people didn't even know her name until I started doing some digging. And I wanted to, get into that story from her perspective. What would it be like to be a woman left alone for more than a decade? Was it freeing? What did she finally have agency over her own life? And that's where the family resemblance ends in the Sicilian Inheritance, the book. But when I researched the time period, I did find out that, when so many women were left behind, they experienced a renaissance of sorts. They got agency over their own lives. They were learning to read and write, and they ran the men's businesses. They were buying and selling real estate. And it was just a time period in Sicilian history that I had never read about or heard about. And because it was primarily focused on women, and I wanted to elevate those women's histories and those women's stories.
And you've done it. And I think that what comes out really beautifully in the book is that previously unnarrated history, those previously unheard voices. And I really want to underscore those friendships, the community, and I've been thinking about this like the last couple of days, so what happens in the absence of men, right? And your book is like really resonates with me these days, just thinking about that, right? And those women rallied. And not only did they rally, but they shined.
They
And
did.
they did. And your personal story, which is like, by the way, it's like if that wasn't some kind of genetic, destiny to become a
Mm.
writer, but growing up with all those stories and really wanting to do justice by your great great grandmother
Hmm.
in a serious way, though, because you are a journalist, that's your background, and you approach this as the book is so multifaceted. You've got a murder mystery, you have the historical aspects, those missing voices, you're recounting those stories, there's sex, there's love, there's food, and then of course all set against this magical backdrop that's the gift that keeps on giving, that
Sicily.
Sicily. And
Yeah.
yeah. And so I guess for me also as an Italian American, I want to go back to that because it's really it's so part of who we are. You just said it, the stories that are told, and that were always told to you from the lens of the men in the family.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and so I guess I want to know, so you had this, something was pushing you to write this book for quite some time. And you ended up then making all sorts of discoveries. So I guess, how did your family react to everything when, when you wrote the book, but also when you discovered the truth, because you discovered the truth, which is like the coolest thing.
I did, yeah. So there, so much was going on there. I started writing the book, and I wanted the book to be pure fiction. Began writing during the pandemic. I think we all wanted an escape at that point, and so I just let myself flow with the story. But once that was finished, I thought that I owed it to Lorenza, my great great grandmother, to try to solve this murder in real life.
Yeah.
And so I did. I did. I went back to Sicily. I created a true crime podcast where I do solve her murder in real life, or I try to solve her murder in real life. No spoilers. In fact, I can reveal to you that the case is still evolving, and we just got a hot lead this week. But
Oh my.
it was very interesting. People ask me a lot. They're like, "How did your family respond? How did they react?" And they all want to be a little bit famous. So they like kind of love it. They love that our family story is out there. But when I started digging into the actual murder, they all had ideas about what had happened, and they didn't like those to be contradicted. A really great example is that many of my family members have gone back to the village of Caltabolota, where
Hmm.
Lorenza is from. In the book, in Sicilian Inheritance, I call it Caltabolessa just so I could have a
Hmm.
little bit of artistic license. But it's Caltabolota. And my family members have been there, and they've gone into the town hall asking for records. If you've
Hmm.
been to these tiny villages, you know about the big book of birth and the big book of death, these handwritten books where they keep records for every year. And the legend from a couple different family members that went was that they go in, someone brings the book out, and then they like slam it in their face. And so, and tell them to get out. And so my family members are like, this is a conspiracy. The entire
Hmm.
town has been covering up her murder for 100 years. And when I went and did this as a journalist and, went through the right channels and did the things you're supposed to do to get these records, the town could not have been more lovely and nicer and more helpful. And there was no conspiracy. My family members just didn't have an appointment. And no one loves no one loves bureaucracy like Sicilians. And no one wants to get the hell out of City Hall and go to lunch like Sicilians. So like there was no conspiracy there, and so I think my family members were a little disappointed about that. But the town couldn't have been more helpful in opening up all of their records to me. And I do have to say, I think it's hard to have your family history questioned because we get these ideas, these myths in our heads, and they shape who we are. They shape our identities, and it's hard to let go of some of those.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And I think there are two things that you mentioned that I'd like to touch on. One is just the generosity and hospitality of Sicilians. I think for population that was so invaded, they are incredibly hospitable, which is pretty mind blowing
Yes.
if you think about it. But I mean, still to this day, it's almost embarrassing sometimes how courteous Sicilians are, just how generous they are. So just wanted to say, like, I totally hear you on that. And then,
Truly.
yeah. And then I'm just curious, as you're talking about, you say the story is evolving, and you just got a hot lead. And it sort of begs the question, Jo. I mean, are you kind of cooking up a sequel?
I am cooking up a sequel to Sicilian Inheritance, actually. I've been working.
Yay!
Yeah, I know. I've been working, and then the podcast is ongoing as things develop. But the book, there is a sequel. I've written about 50 pages of it so far. I'm waiting to see if my editor buys it. I've got to say, it was really interesting when I went to sell this book because we heard from some publishing houses, not my editor and not my publishing house. They're like, I don't think that historical fiction about Italians will sell. And I was like, wow, okay, it's a bold thing to say. Do you know how many Italian Americans there are uh, in the world, in the world, in this country? And now the book is close to selling 90,000 copies. I want it to keep selling like crazy to prove that there is a market for this. And so, yeah, I'm really focusing on a sequel to Sicilian. We just sold the television rights to MGM. So we're working on developing that now, which is really exciting. And
Mhm.
it's yeah, I want to be able to tell stories about strong women like this and strong Italian American women because I think that our community is very hungry for them.
I couldn't agree with you more. And you led me perfectly into my question, which is about the screen adaptation. But before that, I did want to talk for one more second about the kind of appeal that I think the book has, for what it's worth. But I think I told you in that first conversation, I said, this book I think has appeal has a place in Italian American studies, in Italian studies, at universities, at cultural centers. Italian Americans, we are very proud of our heritage. But a lot of people are intrigued by
Mhm.
Italian history and by Italian American history. And for me also, like just I just want to say as a reader who is very proud of my heritage and who has a lot of those stories like you do that are just so within me, I really found myself thinking more about, okay, well, when my grandfather came over, like, really, really trying to imagine the scenarios, what it was like,
Mhm.
living as a woman at that time and, really trying to imagine it and feeling that through your book, I could get there. And so I see it having like an eternal appeal also because Sicily, if we go back to it, if we look at every example of great literary works. I mean, like Sicily is often there, but even
Yeah.
as I said, even leading up to yesterday. So, and in terms of the screen adaptation, I'm curious because, Sicily is so filmable and it's so
Mm.
Instagrammable. And, if you even think about something as recent as The White Lotus, which set off this huge tourism that was,
Oh,
specifically
huge, huge. Yeah.
White Lotus fueled. But your book, I think, very much does the same thing. And for a thinking traveler, because it is
Mhm.
so thick with history and with characters, and you don't take on things that are easy, Jo, because you do talk about the mafia, and
Yeah.
you give these women a voice, and these women have
Mm.
not had a voice, and often I think you pointed out the lack of Italian American women who are represented like this, in literary works. But also I would hazard to say, I mean, there is a lot more here in Italy, obviously, and there are studies dedicated to it, et cetera. But I could see this is very interesting also to an Italian reader.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think, and I've had a lot of Italian readers who have really enjoyed it and who've enjoyed the fact that we are highlighting the women as opposed to the men. And this isn't unique to Italian culture. I mean, we just live in a world where men's stories are the ones that have been shared more often, the ones that have been published more often. I think that's changing, but it's only going to change if we continue to read and share women's stories.
Exactly. And it makes me very happy that the negotiations are well on their way for the screen adaptation. And I'm curious because I think that kind of representation is fundamental as well. I mean, it's super
Totally. Totally.
important.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
reaches it reaches the masses, if you will, the people who just skip the book. And I wonder how you've envisioned it.
Yeah. So I've been working in writing books and adapting things for Hollywood for long enough that when people ask me who I want to be in it, I'm like, oh, the person that gets it made. The person who's gonna stick with it. Because I've had some really big name actresses attach themselves to projects and then just have a dream and decide they weren't gonna do it anymore. So I'm like, the person who's very, very committed and who loves this project for the native Sicilians in this book, I think one of the things we learned from White Lotus is that there's such incredible creative talent in Sicily. So I would love, love, love to work with Sicilian actors and actresses, some really great character actors and actresses. And then, my one dream casting is for Marissa Tomei just to join this project in absolutely any way possible. I mean, I kind of lightly stalk her. Uh, and
I do
I think
too.
right, well, she also has a family murder, an Italian family murder in her family, her family history.
Oh,
So, yeah, I would love to have her involved. And then we're talking to a bunch of different people to play Sarah, our modern day Italian American woman. One of the things I've learned with TV is that I love really great character actors, and I think those are the best shows. If you look at shows like, honestly, White Lotus,
yeah,
all
for
of the
sure.
seasons, The Bear and Succession, those actors, for the most part, were people that we didn't really know that well. And so you can dive into the story and the great storytelling in a way that I think it's harder when you have a Big Little Lies, which is four famous actresses, all with as many fillers as they can possibly put in their face. I think that gets distracting. So, you know, real actors, writers, actors who are passionate about the project is who I want involved. And I think we also all want a little bit of escapism right now. White Lotus came out while I was writing this book, and I remember being like, damn it, why couldn't it come out when the book comes out? But I think that there's a craving for more Sicily content, and this is going to fill that.
Let's take a little break. Do you want to walk in the footsteps of the characters from the Sicilian Inheritance and experience Sicily's beauty, history, and mystery firsthand? Exclusive Connection brings Italy to life with bespoke luxury travel experiences. Whether it's a retreat, a stay at a private villa, a behind-the-scenes tour of ancient ruins, a Sicilian food and wine journey, or Jo Piazza's Sicilian Inheritance itinerary, they will make it unforgettable. Find out more at exclusiveconnection.it. And now back to Jo and the Sicilian Inheritance. Absolutely. And I think that, as I said, it has eternal appeal, and your story is one that has not been told, and it's not just one story. And that's what makes it sort of even more exciting. And I'm really happy because, using local actors is fundamental. I mean, this is a true, it's an authentic story. It speaks, it really captures the spirit of Sicily and the Sicilians. And so if that can happen, I think that would just be, the dream come true, and it would be the truest interpretation of your work. Marissa Tomei is, I think when we talk about, being proud Italian Americans, she's so iconic, and
So
I
I
can't
can.
imagine that she wouldn't be like super excited to get involved somehow in this project, because and I didn't know about the family murder and her story, but
Yeah,
I
there
mean,
was a
how
whole episode. There was an episode, a documentary episode of one of those PBS documentaries where she talked about it, which was fascinating. It was so good. So, yeah, we'll see. I'm working on it.
okay. Well, I mean, I think it's a great idea, and I really can't wait to see how the project unfolds. I'm thinking about your relationship with Sicily. I think both
Hmm.
before you really got to know it so well, and really especially before you started the deep research that you did for the book, and how that relationship changed, or how your identity as an Italian American, more specifically a Sicilian American, changed once you had really gotten in so really into the thick of
Hmm.
of the culture.
Yeah, I've got to say. I think that my identity as both an Italian American woman and a Sicilian American woman, because I think they're kind of different in a way.
Mhm.
They've both deepened as I've gotten older. My dad found a lot of his own identity in being an Italian American. And I remember, embracing it that way, but also thinking, oh my God, like why? Why is he clinging to this in this way? And I became a travel editor and I've been to Italy, I've been to Sicily, and my connection to the people there, it's grown because of what you said. They are, despite all of the stereotypes, they're some of the warmest, friendliest, most inviting people in the world, despite the island being through so much, being put through so much over the years. And I think we're also all kind of grappling with our identity these days. Who am I? What shapes me? And getting to dive into this story and share these women's stories, just it really brought out this Sicilian American part of my identity, which is very interesting too when it comes to my kids, because my children are now these, multi-European mutts. They're like 1/8 of a bunch of different things, right? So I think their identity is much less shaped by where their families came from than mine was, certainly than my dad's was. But me writing this book, they came to Sicily with me. We were there for a month. Um, them getting to come with me, them watching me make the book and make the podcast and do the interviews. It's really made the heritage come alive in them in a really beautiful way.
I love that. I love everything you've said, because I think that that's the storytelling that continues. And, we can go back to that sort of genetic, whatever you want to call it. Your heritage is literally written inside of you. It's just, waiting to come out whenever and however it's going to come out. But I love the fact that it's become something that is so that you want to make sure your kids have too.
Yeah, I really do. I really do. And, I think the best way we can do that with our kids is to model things for them, right? So they see me being
Absolutely.
interested and then they're interested in it.
Hmm. Absolutely. And, as the paperback is coming out, and it's so exciting because I smell spring in the air here
I
in
know. And I
Italy.
also love a paperback. Like I
Me
just
too.
like, you can throw it in your bag. It's so much easier than a hardcover. So I'm so excited for this book to have a paperback life because I think that's what it wants to be.
Me too. And I have to tell you that the timing is perfect, because I'm going on a digital detox retreat from like
Oh my God,
April
stop it.
April 2nd to April 4th. I'll write you about it, because it's the kind of thing I think I'm kind of like I'm looking at myself as a social experiment, but
You are. I
I'm
want you to
not,
write about that for me,
I'm
actually.
going to, I'm
Yeah.
going to. And what I'm doing though, is I'm freaking out because I'm not bringing anything. I'm not bringing my Kindle, which is
Yeah.
my safety blanket or my security blanket, because I tend to like not always love what I'm reading. So I'm going to get your paperback. That way I'm going to bring that and a whole bunch of other stuff, because I want to have like 10 books with me just in case. But I'm looking forward to having, because I read your book on Kindle and I'm still
Right,
kind of
right.
old. I'm a little old style. And so I like the smell of the paperback, and I like the feel of it in my hands. So I'm
I know. I
looking
like to touch
forward.
them. I do like to touch
Yeah.
them. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've been recommending it to everybody.
Oh,
And I
thank you.
think, well, it's easy to recommend because it's it's an escape, just as you said. And I wanted to get back to that just for a second, because I have been recommending it to people. And the reason why is because, like, it's just people need joy right now, and
People need joy right now.
a good story, and just to get lost in something and to dream
Mhm.
about something. And
Yeah.
your book delivers. And I just want to ask if you thought, like, while you were writing it, did you know how magical it was?
Oh, when you're in a book, you don't know anything. That is the truth. Because I'm finishing one right now, and it's like you can't see your way out of it. There were moments when I could glimpse it from a bird's eye view, but when you're in it, you're just like living in the world. And it was only after I finished that first draft, and it's kind of interesting how I put it together because I don't outline. I knew how the book was going to end. I knew the banger of an ending. I didn't know how we were going to get there. And it's dual timelines. It's a present day woman going back to Sicily to claim her inheritance. It's her own great grandmother at the turn of the century, grappling with motherhood and being a wife who is left behind. And I wrote straight through. So I wrote Sarah's chapter in the present day, and then I would just keep going straight through the book, the way you would read it, Serafina back in 1905, until it was done. And then only once all of that was finished, except for the very ending of the book, did I separate those two sections and read them to make sure they could each stand as a novel on their own, in their own right.
Hmm.
And they couldn't. And so then I shaped them and then I built them out as a novel in their own right, and then put them back on top of each other, and then read it all the way through to make sure that everything was lining up and the Easter eggs were and the reveals were all there. And then I think that's when I could see some of the magic, but it took a while because I was just in it. I'm just living in it.
Yeah. Because it does, I mean, I have to tell you it has all these, again, no spoilers, but it has like all these sort of magical, mystical elements as well. But something that for me was just like very powerful was that I found the contemporary character. So I found Sarah completely relatable as a mom, as somebody who, has a crazy career and, everything else that goes on in our modern lives. But I found all of the other characters back in the early 1900s just as relatable as women with their struggles. And so that, again, is something that I think is so intriguing to get caught up in, because it really makes you think. I mean, it takes you away and it takes you into this world, but you're also still in our world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that escapism is so important right now. I mean, I think we all want to be whisked away. We all want, for me, reading really is an escape. It's a way to transcend where I'm at right now, and also a way to feel empathy for others. And I think, empathy is more important than ever right now in the world. So I'm so glad that you felt that too. And I think, again, with the paperback, and I keep saying this, but hardcovers are so expensive these days. Things are expensive these days. I'm just so happy that we have this book at a much more affordable price point so that more people can access it now.
Yeah. And I really want to underscore how I think it is just such a fun read. And, we've talked about this before, but I also, have been reading much, much more. And because it's a need. It's actually like a physical need.
A need.
Yeah. It's a need.
Yeah.
It's actually part of my self-care, whatever I do, is I can't stay here. I don't want to be in this world too much. And so I think your book, I see a lot of people, hopefully, lying on the beach with it, or, sitting on trains while they're traveling, this spring break or whatever. I think it's the kind of book that really does have that mass appeal because it has everything. It has, it's just a really good read. It's just a really fun ride. And so I guess as we sort of come to the end of our conversation, one of the things I want to ask you, and I know a lot of people have asked you this, but I'm still curious to know, do you have a favorite character? I mean, I do. I don't know if I told you.
Yeah. I do. I don't think you told me. I do. I absolutely do. Look, I have to say this, but it is true. I love all of the characters in the book. My favorite character is Juicy. Okay. Giuseppina. She is complicated. She is such a brash and bold Sicilian woman. And most people I talk to, actually, she is their favorite. Except for some people who were like, she was a bad person. And I think it's interesting the way we characterize women as quote unquote bad. I think we often want women in books to be what we see as likable. And men in culture don't have to be that. And I go to TV when I say that. I think about the famous male anti-hero characters like Tony Soprano and Don Draper and Walter White, and people adore them, but we don't give women the same license to be many different things.
Yeah.
And juicy is many things. And I love her for that. And she was also just so fun to write.
Yeah, and I remember you're saying that in interviews, and she is, first of all, just from the name is, it's so funny because the minute I read her name, I was thought of every juicy I'd ever met in Sicily, and there were
Right?
many,
Yeah.
many, 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 and but she's just a great character. She's just a great character. No, she's not necessarily like, I actually never even thought about that when I was reading it. I never thought about her as, she was never not likable to me. But
Yeah.
my favorite character was actually Serafina.
Yeah. No, I mean, also wonderful is the thing. Like that, like I also love her. Yeah.
And
Tell,
and
but
I
tell me
think,
why. Tell me why Serafina
well,
was your favorite.
there are a few reasons. One is
Yeah.
that I think your writing of her, I think, was reminiscent of the way like Maria Messina would write her female
Well,
characters.
and I was reading a lot of Maria Messina at the time, to be
And
honest.
so for
So
me, that
yes.
that that resonated for me personally when I, as a 19 or 20-year-old, made my first trip to Sicily, which was very literary, Jo. It's important
Mhm.
that, like, for me, Sicily has always occupied, it's always been about the literature. So I
Yeah.
remember reading Elio Vittorini's Conversation in Sicily. The first time I took the ferry to Sicily and reading about he writes a description of eating an arancino. And I remember getting off the ferry and being like, I have to have an arancino. So for me, that literary connection, like me, Sicily, books, it's inextricable. And so while I'm reading setup, so it might be because I have that background. And so for me,
Yeah.
that Sicily, late 19th century, early 20th century, was my introduction to Sicily. And I guess maybe as an Italian American, it was as well. And so it
Mhm.
occupies this like mythical space in my brain. So I love Serafina, though, because she was such a great,
Mhm.
smart, um, beautifully written character,
Mhm.
in a time where it was impossible to be a woman like she was. But it's I'm getting chills as I say it, just because she's a really, um she has a wonderful story, and you've written her with grace and with, you've given her such a big voice and such a beautiful legacy.
Yeah. And well, the thing about Serafina, thank you for saying that, is that I've heard from so many readers at book events that Serafina's story is their grandmother's story, their great grandmother's story. Again, the stories that haven't been told. So she has resonated with a lot of people.
Hmm. And Jo, maybe it is exactly that. We're at the end of the podcast. Let's go back to where we started, which is with our narratives, those personal stories that we have grown up with. And maybe I never even thought about it until you just said it. I know the stories of my grandfathers.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Hmm.
knew my grandmothers. I know the stories of my great grandfathers. I'm not sure how much I know about the women in my family beyond the obvious. I don't know, and maybe I would have liked, for them to have bigger lives.
Right. But, I think that's really interesting to think about what is a big life, what constitutes someone's story being told. I When I started writing this, and I say this a lot in book talks, we talk about the men leaving and the women being the ones that held the fabric of society together, right? But that's not unique to Sicily. That's women everywhere. And think about the Crusades, men left for forever, right? I mean,
Yeah.
men have been leaving. Men have been leaving to go to war, to
Hmm.
build cities and to migrate. And it's always been the women holding societies together, being the unsung heroes. And that is big work. Those are big stories.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, what I'm saying, when I said it, I was thinking just more of like lack of opportunity,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so for example, Serafina, why does she resonate? Because
Hmm.
can you imagine if she had had access, and we
Yes.
think, but that's not like so far off, you know what I mean? Like they're definitely, so I mean, but that's a whole different conversation. But I think fundamentally what you've given us, with your book, is just, it's a fun romp through an enchanted island. But it leaves us with a lot of questions and a lot of, I think also a lot of really sweet things. Like I missed the characters, and
I
that's
do
always,
too, which is why I can't stop writing them.
well, keep doing it because I want to see what happens next. I really know, like I really, really do. And when a book sticks with you like that, when the characters stick with you like that, Jo, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, you've done a great thing. You've done a great service to Sicily, and it's not an easy place to write about.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not because I wanted to do justice to Sicily. That was the thing for me, right? And
Mhm.
I did not want to glorify the mafia. I had to deal with it. And so it, I spent so much time reading and learning even more about the history of Sicily, which was awesome for me, right? That I got to do that. That was so cool.
Yeah. But I think, as I said, like the best thing about the best things about the book, and there are many, is that, there is all the like the wonderful food. You've got the cannoli and you've got, the beautiful backdrops. And you really get a sense of the island and its people. And you really just want to pack your bags and go. So, on that note,
Everybody book a ticket to Sicily. I'll be there with you. I'll come,
I'll
obviously.
come. I'll
Yeah.
come. And I think it's just wonderful that you've put in this itinerary in the paperback
Oh, it's
because
so fun.
your book is so steeped in the culture, and it's such an accurate depiction of the island and of its history. And so giving people that kind of extra guidance, but you've already given a
Mhm.
lot of guidance because you really do give people access to the culture. And that's something that not a lot of people do, Jo. And then, surprise, surprise, I'm also giving you my insider tips, which is so sweet, so generous of
Yes,
you,
yes. Well, also, I mean,
so
I actually
Sicilian,
do. So Sicilian, right? I
so
mean, I actually do want
Sicilian.
to travel with everyone. I'm also, well, and I'm just going to throw this out there on the podcast. I do want to incorporate Sicilian retreats into the future. So I'm hoping, I mean, you and I can work on that together and, bring those to people. And I think that'll be a lot of fun.
Could totally see that happening, and I would love to do that. I mean,
Yeah, I think it'd be so
we
much
could
fun.
we could get a lot of people to Sicily, and we could make something really incredible
Make
happen. I'm
something really
down.
incredible happen. I know. Exactly. Exactly.
All right. Well, let's do it. So I can't thank you enough for coming today, Jo. It's just been such a joy speaking with you.
This was
I
such a joy. I loved it.
I loved it too. And I want everyone to read the book. I've been telling everyone about it, but seriously,
Thank
do
you.
yourselves a favor and escape to Sicily this spring and this summer. And you won't regret it. You're going to have a really fun time because it's a great read. It's a great read.
Oh, thank you.
Grazie a te, Jo Piazza. Grazie
Grazie a
mille.
te. Grazie mille.
Thank you again, Jo Piazza, for joining me and for giving us all a novel that is as smart as it is captivating, a book that peels back the layers of history, identity, and belonging. The Sicilian Inheritance isn't just a story, it's an experience. So grab the paperback, book a flight to Italy, and let Exclusive Connection take care of the rest. From Sicily's sun-drenched landscapes to Florence's Renaissance charm, they create extraordinary custom travel experiences. Visit exclusiveconnection.it and start packing your bags for your Italian escape today. Grazie mille e alla prossima volta.